What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. And last week I discussed, everything that took place on the Trump campaign in Butler, PA. God bless all those who were affected still. And, we're moving on from that because that's just something that shouldn't happen in this country. It still baffles me to this day that anybody would want to stoop that low at all. It makes no sense to me. It's just shameful and just something that shouldn't happen in this great country of ours. So we're moving past that. But I also talked about a bunch of different sports topics last week, and I really hope you enjoyed all those. But we got a full slate of sports to talk about today. A couple recent stories, couple newer stories, We're going to go through a lot today. And obviously, as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador. So use promo code SHOW32. Get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. All right, so let's get started with today. And most recently, Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver for the 49ers, has requested a trade. And in all honesty, I could have saw this coming from a mile away, and I feel like a lot of people have been thinking about this and talking about this months and months before it even happened. We know that Brandon Aiyuk wanted a big-time contract, and the 49ers weren't willing to give him one. And here's the reality for the 49ers. You're paying Christian McCaffrey, obviously the most expensive and arguably the first or second best running back in the entire NFL. You have the Joey Bosa contract, which really hasn't taken fold yet until this year. And San Fran is on the hook for a lot of money when it comes to that contract. Again, Joey Bosa is completely worth it. He's one of the 2 or 3 best pass rushers in the NFL. You can make that argument. He's been a force to be reckoned with on the defensive side of the football. You also have Deebo Samuel, the Swiss Army knife of the NFL, and the Swiss Army knife really of the entire San Francisco 49ers. Whatever happens, sometimes the entire offense, before even McCaffrey got there, ran through Deebo Samuel. It didn't matter who was quarterback. It did not matter where you lined up Deebo Samuel on offense. He was going to make plays. And George Kittle, in his own respect, he makes pretty damn good money for his position. So obviously, when it comes to contract situations in the NFL, we all know that you can't pay everybody. We all know that there's only so much money that can go around, and oftentimes you're going to find yourself on the short end of the stick if you are, below, an okay NFL player to pretty good NFL player. And I think Brandon Aiyuk, he classifies as pretty damn good. I wouldn't put him in the upper echelon of wide receivers. He's not as good as a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, those kind of guys, those game changers that take over games immediately when they step on the field. Brandon Aiyuk is more of a deep threat kind of guy and has been really helpful in the 49ers' quest to try and reach the Super Bowl yet again. But yet again, as we all know, they came up short against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the playoffs, in the Super Bowl. So where does this leave Brandon Aiyuk? And where does this leave the 49ers, Brock Purdy, and what about possible destinations? So first of all, let's talk about the reality of what kind of effect this will have on the 49ers. It will have somewhat of an impact on the 49ers. They're still such a loaded roster. I talked about it last week when I made my Super Bowl bubble predictions, teams who I think can win it currently right now, and those who have a puncher's chance and an outside shot to make the Super Bowl. San Francisco is in that bubble, and they are primed, locked, loaded. They have one of the best rosters overall, top to bottom in the NFL. GM, head coach, quarterback, running backs, receivers, offensive line, tight end, defense. The 49ers really don't have any true weaknesses. So the loss of Brandon Aiyuk, I think it will have a decent amount of an impact on the 49ers, but not for necessarily the 49ers' sake in of itself, but more for Brock Purdy. I think it was very imperative that the 49ers were able to get a deal done with Brandon Aiyuk to keep him and Brock Purdy on the same team, to keep him, Deebo, Kittle, McCaffrey, all of those guys on the same offense and the same team and the same system, just meshing well together and trying to make a run at another Super Bowl. So what does this mean for the Niners and Brock Purdy? Well, Brock Purdy, not necessarily known for his deep ball. He's not really a push the ball down the field kind of quarterback, and Brandon Aiyuk is a more stretch the field kind of player. That's what Brandon Aiyuk has been for the 49ers. While Debo is the Swiss Army knife, you could put him in the backfield, the slot, a regular receiver position at the Z or Y, or you even want to line him up right behind Kittle, right behind the tight end. It didn't matter. You can give Debo Samuel the rock out of the backfield or split out as a wide receiver. That's the reason Debo Samuel got his money, is because he's a Swiss Army knife. You can line him up anywhere, and he'll still deliver as one of the best athletes in the NFL. I still think he's probably a top 10 skill player in the entire NFL and one of the top 10 most valuable skill players in the NFL. But when it comes to Brandon Aiyuk, he's not that kind of guy. He's not the guy you can line up in the backfield, ask to block, ask to line up in the slot. He's still a good quality receiver, but he's not a number one. He's not a number one and has never been that for the 49ers. But he is a stretch the field kind of wide receiver. He's got wheels. He's got good hands. He's just not a number one. And Debo is that. So there's the first problem. Second problem is they went all in on Christian McCaffrey. The 49ers went all in on Christian McCaffrey, trying to get a game-changer running back who can catch the ball and run the rock at the same time. And arguably, anybody can make that argument that McCaffrey is the one or two best running back in the entire NFL, and it's not often you have guys like that. And, a lot of people say you shouldn't pay running backs, but when they're that good, sort of like a Derrick Henry from a couple years ago, a Saquon Barkley from a couple years ago, and now Christian McCaffrey, who seemed to return to his earlier days of Carolina form in San Francisco, which, again, everybody succeeds in that offense with Kyle Shanahan. But when it comes to Brandon Aiyuk, I think losing Aiyuk, the 49ers are going to take a little bit of a step back this year. I think they'll be more of a wild card team, and I still have them in the Super Bowl bubble. Don't get me wrong. I still have them there. They can easily win it because, like I said, from top to bottom, the roster is one of the best in the NFL. But Brandon Aiyuk added a different element to the 49ers offense, a deep ball threat that can take the top off of the defense whenever. And Kyle Shanahan benefited from that play calling, because when you have Aiyuk, when you have a speedy receiver, someone who can take the top off the defense and someone who can burn the corners and burn the safeties at will, it opens up everything else across the field for George Kittle at tight end, for Christian McCaffrey, whether that be running the ball or catching the ball out of the backfield, and Debo Samuel. Having multiple weapons like that at such key positions, you spread out the defense. You can't double team everybody on the field at the same time. Someone's going to be open always, and that was one of the biggest benefits I think helped San Francisco, is the fact that even though Aiyuk wasn't considered the guy on offense, he still had, great numbers in his own right, but he was able to spread out the defense so well that it just opened up everything for everybody. It's not just a Brandon Aiyuk thing. It's a McCaffrey thing. It's a Kittle thing. It's a Debo thing. It's even a Brock Purdy thing. Like, all of this combined is what made San Francisco so effective. Now, Brandon Aiyuk not wanting to play for the 49ers anymore and requesting a trade, I think this hurts Brock Purdy more than it helps him. I've heard people on different talk shows say that this could be good for Brock Purdy because he's not necessarily a deep ball throwing kind of quarterback, but that's specifically the reason why I think it's bad for Brock Purdy, is because he doesn't have that necessity of an over-the-top kind of player, an over-the-top kind of wide receiver anymore. He's not going to have that. And as a result of that, the entire defense is going to blanket a bunch of the field wherever Debo may be lined up, or George Kittle or Christian McCaffrey. They can tee off on the San Francisco 49ers offense, more easily than they could rather if they had Brandon Aiyuk on the team. But for all intents and purposes, obviously this stuff is subject to change, but I don't think Brandon Aiyuk will be a 49er this upcoming year. So does it hurt the 49ers? Yes, slightly. I think it's more detrimental to Brock Purdy because I think it puts more pressure on his shoulders to deliver the ball to guys that the defense knows is going to get the ball. So I think Brock Purdy might have I think this year he'll take a step back. I already said he's not the guy, so don't get my words twisted or anything like that. But I definitely think he still needed Brandon Aiyuk on the team in order to stretch the field, spread out the defense, and just open up lanes for everybody else, McCaffrey, Kittle, Debo, and even Aiyuk to an extent. It's, it all meshed well together. So what are the two best landing spots for Brandon Aiyuk in a hypothetical trade right now? Well, I think number one is clear and obvious is the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers, since the day of Antonio Brown, have not really had that much of a blow it open, take the top off of the defense kind of wide receiver. Yeah, Deontay Johnson, he was okay. I will say there's no team in the NFL that has a feel for wide receivers more than Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is one of the best in the NFL at drafting, developing, and just creating playmakers at the receiver position. You think about all the great names that came through Pittsburgh through the draft: Hines Ward, Antoine Randall, Mike Wallace, Antonio Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and now George Pickens. The list goes on and on when it comes to who develops and drafts wide receiver talent the best in the NFL, and I think it's Pittsburgh hands down. Now, those guys don't always end up staying in Pittsburgh, which is unfortunate because those were some great days when Pittsburgh had Emmanuel Sanders and Antonio Brown and Mike Wallace and Hines Ward and Antoine Randall, who were all on the same team at the exact same time, which makes me even more sick to be a Steeler fan somewhat. But either way, for Pittsburgh, you have George Pickens, you have Calvin Austin, you just drafted Roman Wilson from Michigan, who will be fine. Everybody needs to realize that Roman Wilson is going to succeed in Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh just has an ear and an eye for wide receiver talent every single year, it seems like. Every single year they'll find a gem in the later rounds or even in the early rounds that blossoms into a star for Pittsburgh. George Pickens is already starting to blossom into another top-tier wide receiver, I would say. Now, inconsistencies with the offensive line. Lord knows the quarterback position needed work. Kenny Pickett was not the answer. Half the time you can't even read the field and even get the ball to George Pickens to even make a play. But when George Pickens is given that opportunity, he damn near always delivers. That man catches everything in sight. So I think for Pittsburgh, this would make sense. Obviously, Pittsburgh, it doesn't bother me if they were to give up draft capital just because they are so good at drafting skill position players. Now, offensive line is a completely different story. They've been rebuilding the offensive line for damn near 8 years at this point. But when it comes to adding another weapon for Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields, you already have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren at running back, a good 1-2 punch in the NFL. The offensive line, while it's not where it needs to be right now, is growing and evolving. It's doing pretty well. So fingers crossed for that. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line will be fine. Then you have Calvin Austin, who's a solid slot receiver. You'll have Roman Wilson, who I think will end up starting maybe midway to the end of the year for Pittsburgh. And then you have George Pickens, who obviously just takes the top off of the defense, but obviously it helps if you have another number 2 wide receiver. I don't believe Pittsburgh has that right now. They had Allen Robinson. I believe he's still on the team, but Allen Robinson is not what he used to be when he was with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and even the Chicago Bears for that brief stint. But if Pittsburgh would to trade for Brandon Aiyuk, that's one more weapon to add to Russell Wilson and that entire Pittsburgh Steelers arsenal of talent. There's talent there. You can't tell me that there's not talent on Pittsburgh's roster. So getting another weapon for Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, depending on whichever way they go, I think will only benefit Pittsburgh in the long run. Pittsburgh's not notorious for making big-ass trades in all realism, but they did this past offseason. So Omar Khan, I feel like, could definitely fleece San Francisco, or at least, give up something that's not too ridiculous to get Brandon Aiyuk. And I think that will elevate the offense to much greater heights and give Russell Wilson more of an opportunity to succeed as a quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's kind of blatantly obvious that it would go that way. I just mentioned before that, taking away Aiyuk from that offense, it allows the defense to tee off more on the players that the San Francisco 49ers have. The defense is not as spread out as it was. Whereas now in Pittsburgh, if we had Brandon Aiyuk, you spread out the defense and you have weapons all over the field and you have, better opportunities for Russell Wilson to deliver the football. And you have better opportunities for run after the catch and, just big-time plays coming from all the skill position players. Second best destination for Brandon Aiyuk, the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are in my Super Bowl bubble still. From top to bottom, other than their secondary, which needs a lot of work if we're being honest, from top to bottom, they are still one of the best rosters in the NFL. The one thing that they haven't seemed to have found yet is a number 2 receiver. Jared Goff definitely needs at least one more receiver that he can rely on. John Mechie is okay, but he's not always available, either injury, suspension, whatever it may be. But John Mechie really hasn't came into his own as a number 2, possibly be a number 1 someday. At least some mock drafts had him that way. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, really underrated wide receiver. I would put him up in the upper echelon of wide receivers in the NFL. He's been that good. He's more of a possession receiver. He catches everything in sight, but his route running ability is one of the best I've seen in quite a while when it comes to any wide receiver playing in the NFL. Obviously, I don't think he's the best, but he is definitely a number 1 wide receiver in the league. But by adding Brandon Aiyuk, you free up Amon-Ra St. Brown more. That frees up John Mechie more, who is a speed burner, for the Detroit Lions. He can absolutely fly and take the top off the defense. And adding Brandon Aiyuk to that mix would only further enhance Jared Goff and the entire Lions offense, if we're being honest. And who knows? Now, it's universally known that skill position players aren't really worth that many points when it comes to point differentials and, just points in general when it comes to comparing teams and who has, so many point swings in certain games. But I feel like Brandon Aiyuk, while he's not worth a touchdown extra a game, he's definitely, I feel like, worth at least a field goal. Brandon Aiyuk is a solid player. I don't necessarily think he's a number 1, but he is definitely a solid player with number 1 wide receiver potential still. I don't think he's done maturing and growing as a player yet, but for the time being, San Francisco is not going to pay him that kind of money for the player he is right now, especially after locked in all those contracts San Francisco already has. Nick Bosa, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Debo, and possibly Brock Purdy at the end of the year, maybe. There's just a lot of mouths to feed in San Francisco, so it makes sense that Brandon Aiyuk would have been the one ousted. So Brandon Aiyuk requesting a trade, 2 best possible destinations, easily in my opinion, the Lions and the Pittsburgh Steelers. All right, so let's move on to our next topic. I want to talk about one former coach in the NFL who has not received a ring yet. His name, we all know his name, Bill Belichick, the architect of the entire Patriots dynasty, when we all know it was mainly Brady. The second Brady left, Belichick was a dumpster fire in New England. We all saw it, we all know it, we all lived it. So any of those still think that it was Belichick partially. Well, they're both partially responsible, but anybody out there who still thinks Bill Belichick was the main reason for that dynasty, you're full of it, and just stop talking. But I want to talk about why Bill Belichick has not gotten a phone call yet or has been offered any head coaching position in the NFL. And it's because he's power hungry. It's because he needs to have ultimate say and ultimate control over the team's decision making. And we saw this a lot in New England towards the back end of his career there, when it seemed like each and every single year, New England's draft would be absolutely putrid. Like, absolutely putrid. They have the worst receiving core in the NFL, maybe even by a country mile, and Bill Belichick was allergic to drafting skill position players. He'll draft guards all live long day and defensive safeties and ends and backers. He'll draft those guys all live long day. But the second they need a wide receiver, either one, he whiffs. N'Keal Harry from a couple years ago. Everybody knows what a bust he's been. Or just some middle-of-the-road safety. That's all Bill Belichick drafted. He drafts maybe a skill position player once in a blue moon when it came to New England. But I want to talk about the guy who was alongside Bill Belichick for all those years when he was power hungry, and that's Nick Caserio, the general manager for the Houston Texans. So you can see Nick Caserio, was doing a lot of good things in New England when it comes to scouting and reporting and, who New England should draft for the future of the team. But ultimately, especially the back end of the career, Bill Belichick was very power hungry, and he had ultimate decision and ultimate say on who the team would draft. Well, isn't it funny that Nick Caserio, in just a few short years, has turned basically the Houston Texans into a juggernaut? Maybe that's a little bit of a stretch of a term, juggernaut, but formidable? Absolutely. I think about guys like Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Brevin Jordan, Will Anderson, C.J. Stroud. He hasn't missed in his drafting and developing of players. Houston, I've already said, is primed and ready to make some noise in the AFC and possibly has a puncher's chance to make it to the Super Bowl. C.J. Stroud, obviously, is already making a case for being a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, even after his rookie season. And me personally, I would put him in a top 10 quarterback conversation right now. But I think that's just a tip of the cap to Nick Caserio and what a job he's done as general manager for the Houston Texans. When you're older, power hungry, stuck in your ways, have no motivation to deviate from your current situation and what you currently know. Nick Caserio on the younger end has seen old, bitter, power-hungry Bill Belichick. He's seen how his drafting works. He's seen how his philosophy of coaching works. He's seen it all firsthand. And Nick Caserio really learned from Bill Belichick. He learned what not to do. Nick Caserio has an argument to be one of the best GMs in this entire league for the work he's done in the few short years he's been with the Houston Texans. So I really think Nick Caserio succeeding in Houston is the biggest indictment on Bill Belichick right now, because this man had ultimate say in New England over Caserio when it came to drafting player personnel and developing player personnel, on the New England Patriots towards the back end of the dynasty. And then now Nick Caserio is just building a great, great team around C.J. Stroud and for head coach DeMeco Ryans. So I think Nick Caserio succeeding so well in Houston and really turning this team into, it looks like they're going to be a formidable juggernaut in the AFC in the years to come. And who knows, that might be right around the corner quicker than anybody could have thought. This team was in a rebuild for all intents and purposes last year. Nope. They made a playoff run and destroyed the Browns in the playoffs, ultimately losing to Lamar Jackson, but that was to be expected. They were still a very young team. But Nick Caserio succeeding in Houston is the biggest indictment on Bill Belichick's career at this moment in time. And I think it's the biggest reason that NFL executives around the league, they're looking at this situation. They watched it unfold. Nick Caserio was doubted by Bill Belichick, and realistically, this is how it should basically went. I don't trust your judgment. I'm going to trust mine. His judgment sucked. Casario's clearly is doing great things in Houston. So I think that's the biggest reason Bill Belichick does not have a job right now. And that's because of how successful Nick Caserio is doing right now. All right, we're going to do a couple more topics right now. I want to talk about the USA men's Olympic team. That team is out. They are a bunch of men on a mission, gold or bust. And LeBron James hitting a game winner against South Sudan was unreal. I will say that entire game had me nervous until Steph Curry, LeBron, AD, like all those guys, they woke up and played their asses off. And, of course, LeBron hitting the game winner on that beautiful driving layup, and then great defensive stand on the opposite side. And the USA, they're out for business. But I wanted to talk about one specific player on the team, and that's Joel Embiid. Why does it seem like whenever Joel Embiid is on the floor for the USA men's basketball team in the Olympics, he holds them back? Is it that? I feel like it's not hard to miss of how much Embiid gets in the way of their offense. It seems like he's just a tree just standing there, waiting for them to run the offense through Embiid rather than, trust in the play calling from the men's basketball coaches. I think of guys like Anthony Davis, who doesn't have the MVPs. He doesn't have the Defensive Player of the Years. Anthony Davis is one of the most underappreciated big guys in the NBA. He's been one of the best big men in the NBA for the better part of 10 years now. And people just don't give him enough credit. When they put Anthony Davis in over Embiid, I remember one of these games that Anthony Davis had 6 blocks. He only made like 2 shots, but had 6 blocks. He had more of a presence on the court than Joel Embiid does. And Joel Embiid is looked at as the number one guy in Philly. He's looked as the number one guy. He's an MVP. But the man has never gotten past the second round in the playoffs. I'm just wondering, why is Joel Embiid starting over Anthony Davis? I think it's ludicrous, especially the way you look at them play on the Olympic Games right now. It makes no sense to me. Anthony Davis, it's like night and day, is clearly the better player over Joel Embiid, and I think he deserves to start over Embiid right now currently. Anthony Davis is a straight-up animal. But, I'm not the one who's coaching. I'm not the one who's making decisions. It's neither here nor there. But, I think it's just something to think about, how whenever Embiid is on the floor, it seems like the guys have to work around Embiid, like LeBron, Curry, Booker, Kevin Durant. I feel like Jason Tatum, they all have to work around Embiid because it seems like he's really getting in the way of offensive production for the men's team. And then when Anthony Davis is on the floor, it's a completely different team. Completely different. AD's defensive presence on the court alone shifts the dynamic drastically in the way of the USA team. The fact that Anthony Davis maybe he doesn't deserve an MVP. I wouldn't go as far as MVP. Jokic, I could see deserving one. Embiid, not really. I can't see how he won an MVP award. But Anthony Davis, I feel, has been the most underappreciated big man in the entire NBA for the better part of, damn near 10 years. The fact that this man does not have a Defensive Player of the Year and Rudy Gobert has more than him is actually really sickening to me. Anthony Davis is easily a top 2 big men in the entire NBA. I would rate the top 5. Obviously, I think Jokic is the best ball handling big man in the history of the NBA. So obviously, I would put him at 1. Number 2, you can make that argument, but I would definitely go Giannis. Giannis, the Greek freak. He's amazing. He's amazing. But then I would put Anthony Davis. I would not go and put Joel Embiid. And then 5th, I'd probably put Karl Anthony Towns or Rudy Gobert at that point. But that's scraping the bottom of the barrel. Only when it comes to Rudy Gobert. Cat is actually pretty decent. But, that's just something to think about. Watching these Olympic Games for the men's basketball team is actually, it's awesome. Seeing the USA, get bounced and upset, especially by Germany last year. Seeing the redemption of this team. Steph Curry has been lights out. This is what makes U.S. men's basketball so amazing. They should be putting teams out like this every single time the Olympics go on. You have the best three-point shooter of all time on the team. You have arguably the best player in basketball history on the same team. You have a bunch of the best. You have Joel Embiid and Anthony Davis, even though I just shit on Embiid for about a good 5 minutes. He's still one of the best big men in the league and big men in the world. But, I think it's obviously gold or bust for the U.S. men's Olympic team. And I think they take it this year because these guys are not messing around whatsoever. They are not messing around. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something I never thought I'd ever talk about. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about it. The WNBA. What am I going to talk about? Well, obviously, one of the only reasons to talk about it, Caitlin Clark. So I read a story recently that Caitlin Clark is not on the Olympic team, the women's Olympic team. And is it because she has to pay her dues? Is it, a seniority sort of thing in the WNBA? Here's what I don't get, and here's what I'll say. There's a reason I have never, ever talked about the WNBA until now. The fact that Caitlin Clark came into the league for the Indiana Fever and has been, lighting it up as a rookie, maybe it's not transitioning to wins, but it will in time. What is the WNBA trying to prove? You have been killing and begging and working so tirelessly and effortlessly hard to gain the viewership that you have now. Why would you not put every single asset you have on the Olympic team to draw even more attention towards the sport? Throughout my life, I always knew the WNBA was a thing. I always knew that, but I never watched it. I was never interested in it. What drive was there for it? And then here comes Caitlin Clark. Totally changes the league. From a popularity standpoint, never mind her talent. She's a great talent. She's a great basketball player. But from a popularity standpoint, the WNBA viewership has spiked since she came into the league. Her and Angel Reese. The Angel Reese-Caitlin Clark rivalry right now, that's something that's going to go down in sports history. That's, it's kind of cool watching, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese battle it out whenever they get on the court together. It's interesting. It drives more viewership. People like me who have never given a damn about the WNBA. Suddenly we're starting to give a damn because it's kind of cool watching this. We're interested in it. That's just the reality of it. So why on earth would you keep Caitlin Clark out of the Olympic team? I don't care if she is a rookie. She's still probably the best player in your entire league. And yes, she is a rookie, but she's still better than half the people who play in that league. More than half of the people who play in that league. And there was more stories about this, and this was more so a couple weeks ago, maybe even, I want to say a month or two ago. But the fact of the matter is that people were hammering all the other players from really, those who were taking shots at Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark's a tough girl. She'll be fine. She's just, talking about earning her dues. Like, I really think a lot of it is jealousy because nobody gave a shit about the WNBA, and then all of a sudden Caitlin Clark comes in and now everybody seems to be interested in it. I think it just shows how polarizing Caitlin Clark is as a player. Like I said, she'll be fine, and she's just driving in more and more popularity for the entire sport, for the entire league. And this all boils down to, like, you have interesting storylines in this entire season. Caitlin Clark as a rookie, Angel Reese as a rookie. Those two going up against each other as rookies. Like, that's awesome. And then now all of a sudden, Caitlin Clark is not going to be representing any of the women in the Olympics for the WNBA. That makes zero sense to me. The WNBA has been craving and killing for even the smallest fraction of viewership that the NBA gets, or even any sports program for that matter. They've been killing for that for years, and now they have it, and it seems like they're doing everything in their power not to take advantage of it. It just makes no sense to me. Embrace Caitlin Clark for one. She's a great player. Now she is a rookie, and she's not I guess you can't make her the face of the league as a rookie, but she's easily your biggest revenue generator, and has been since she came in the league. Like I said, I have never thought about WNBA one time, but the second I turned on an Indiana Fever game, I'm like, I'm going to watch a little bit. All right, Caitlin Clark. That's pretty sweet. She's got skill. But it just shows you, the type of player Caitlin Clark is and what she means to the WNBA in general. Viewership matters, and WNBA has been craving it and killing for that for decades now. And now it's at their doorstep. Now they just need to pounce and embrace it because, Caitlin Clark is a rookie. She's going to be playing a long time. And the WNBA is just only going to get more popular from that. Lean into it. Put her on the damn Olympics team. The hell are you guys doing? Makes no sense to me. All right, we're going to talk about one last thing today. So going into the NFL season, I usually always like to, obviously I give my predictions. I made my Super Bowl bubble last week. A couple weeks ago, I mentioned teams who I thought were going to win the division. And I also mentioned plenty of times, the best incoming players at certain positions this year, like quarterbacks or, wide receivers or anything like that. Who you got to look out for this year? Well, I saw a bunch of lists recently of, the top coaches heading into this season. And it had me thinking. Now I'm taking everything into account. Every single one of these coaches has their flaws. There's small flaws. Some of them have more flaws than others. But I think this is the top 10 coaches going into this 2024 NFL season. I'm going to start with the honorable mentions. Now, some of you people out there, you might give me shit for this. Honorable mention, Sean McDermott from the Bills and Sean Payton from the Broncos. While I like Sean McDermott, and I'm not really a fan of defensive coaches anymore because the league has pivoted so much to offense. Sean McDermott has still done what very few Bills head coaches have managed to do, and that's make them a consistent playoff contender, and even up until recently, Super Bowl contenders. Sean McDermott is a great defensive player, a great defensive coach, but it seems like they still have not gotten the offensive line right. No consistent run game. Obviously, the loss of Stephon Diggs and the loss of a lot of defensive pieces. I don't know how it's going to go for Sean McDermott. But you still have Josh Allen, so that makes it enough to at least contend. And then Sean Payton. Denver was a dumpster fire with Russell Wilson. In comes Sean Payton. He makes him somewhat respectable again overnight. Sean Payton's a really good coach. My entire life, at least the first half of my entire life, the Saints were the doormat of the NFL, along with like the Detroit Lions. They were irrelevant until Sean Payton came with Drew Brees. And then he turned them into a Super Bowl champion and made them a relevant franchise. So those are my honorable mentions. I want more time out of Sean Payton when it comes to Denver, but I think they'll be viable this year because I think Sean Payton is a great coach. But he's not in my top 10 right now. So number 1, Andy Reid, hands down, has been the most dominant head coach in the NFL since the NFL has pivoted to an offensive league. Obviously, he has Patrick Mahomes, which always helps. But when it comes to scheming and play design, he might be the best offensive play designer in football. And even when the Chiefs were having issues with their wide receiver position, it didn't matter. Now Mahomes made it work, but Andy Reid designed the plays for those wide receivers. So Andy Reid at 1. Number 2, Sean McVay for the Rams. One of the youngest head coaches to ever win a Super Bowl. Sean McVay, one of the brightest offensive minds in football. Can his play calling get a little iffy sometimes? Sure, but that's very far few in between. But nobody on the Rams drafts and develops their players. Nobody in the NFL drafts and develops players better than the Rams. As far as I'm concerned, every single time the Rams have a draft, it seems like they find a diamond in the rough. Puka Nacua, for example. Who ever thought that man would become a stud right next to Cooper Kupp now, who will be coming back? Sean McVay took Jared Goff to a Super Bowl and won one with Matt Stafford. Sean McVay always has, he's always making the Rams viable. They're always viable with McVay. So he's number 2. Number 3, this is going to shock a lot of people. Mike Tomlin. I know when it comes to offense, he doesn't have the best feel for offensive line or offensive coordinators. But the man has never had a losing season. He is the ultimate motivator when it comes to NFL coaches. He will get every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears out of those players in Pittsburgh. And he has done that for years on end. I know he only has 1 Super Bowl. I know he doesn't have a great feel for offense. But as far as being just a leader of men and the ultimate motivator, Mike Tomlin, very far few in between of other coaches that can compare to Mike Tomlin. Not far behind him, John Harbaugh, who has more of a feel for offense, but less of the playoff success and less of the winning success. He has Lamar Jackson, which helps. But when it comes to, just overall, like building a culture, John Harbaugh walked into Baltimore and set a culture that's been standing for years on end. I think John Harbaugh is a fantastic coach, and I'll put him at 4. Might have him a little low, but Kyle Shanahan at number 5. Kyle Shanahan is my 5th best coach heading into this NFL season. Now, why don't I have him higher? Kyle Shanahan is so dedicated to his script sheet, to his play sheet. There's very little room for maneuver and for off-script plays. You see guys like Patrick Mahomes, Matt Stafford, a bunch of other guys in the NFL that can just make plays. When it comes to Kyle Shanahan, it seems like everything has to be scripted, which is why I feel like at the end of games they always choke. So Kyle Shanahan, and the fact that he has choked multiple times in Super Bowls, NFC championships, big games in general, it's like he can't escape his play sheet and the design plays he has with no room for improvising at all. I think Kyle Shanahan, he's a great coach in my opinion. Great, one of the best offensive minds in football. But I think he could get too dedicated to his play sheet and too dedicated to the script that coaches like to follow. Number 6, Kevin Stefanski. Simple matter. Kevin Stefanski has made the Browns relevant. The Browns, my entire life, have been irrelevant. And then in comes Kevin Stefanski, a leader of men, has a presence to himself, and he set a culture in Cleveland. He turned Cleveland around. He won a playoff game with Baker Mayfield, who everybody rode off in the distance. But when it comes to offensive design and defensive design, Kevin Stefanski is a great coach. He made the Browns relevant. That's why Kevin Stefanski is my sixth best head coach heading into this season. Number 7, Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur, honestly, has to be one of the most underappreciated head coaches in the league. He had Aaron Rodgers for a couple years, and he had plenty of big wins over those couple years. He doesn't have the Super Bowls yet, but when it comes to winning, Matt LaFleur, he's a solid head coach that has a solid foundation. It took him a while, but you know who's running the Packers in Green Bay. It's Matt LaFleur. And clearly, he trusts Jordan Love, and he designs plays that suit Jordan Love. I think Green Bay's in for a big season. Number 8, Mike McDaniel is making Tua look like a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro. His offensive play design, it can rival that of Sean McVay or a Kyle Shanahan. He just has a bright offensive mind, but he has little to no feel for defense. It also happens to be his, that's not his side of the ball, but also injuries played a big part in their defense, just giving up so many points all year last year. But as far as play call and play design, Mike McDaniel's up there, and he's making Tua look like an All-Pro. Number 9, Dan Campbell. Everybody in Detroit, everybody knows. Just like Kevin Stefanski going to the Browns, Dan Campbell, I'll admit, I was wrong on him. He completely turned the Lions franchise around. Those players, while he may not be the smartest coach, he may be overly aggressive, way overly aggressive, may not have the best play called and play design all the time. But when it comes to getting players to buy into a culture and buy into what you want to do, Dan Campbell is up there with the best of them, like guys like John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin. And my number 10 head coach heading into this year, DeMeco Ryans for the Houston Texans, a defensive coach who knows and has a good feel for offense. DeMeco Ryans was all but handed a team in a rebuild. He led them to the playoffs. Obviously, it helps having C.J. Stroud, but he led them to the playoffs and won a playoff game in his first year. He's one of the few defensive head coaches I've seen that actually has a feel for offense and knows what he's doing when, hiring coaches for said offense and, the drafting and developing of players. He's a smart dude and, a presence to himself, a former player in the league. I think DeMeco Ryans is on his way to becoming one of the best coaches in the NFL. And that's my top 10 list, and that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. Again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me.